I want to talk a little bit about goals on the line of how do you lose 37 pounds and write a book. I'm just going to kind of give you that as an example. For 24 years of my adult life, by choice, I weighed well over 200 pounds. I say by choice because, you see, I have never accidentally eaten anything. I mean, it's always been deliberate. And when I choose to eat too much today, I have chosen to weigh too much tomorrow. You can choose to set goals and realize your potential, or you can choose not to set them. Now, if you choose not to set them, you got to understand that the consequences are not going to be good down the road. For 24 years, I was going to lose that weight. As a matter of fact, in 24 years, I lost several thousand pounds of weight. How many of you already know exactly what I'm talking about? But it wasn't until I wrote it down, put a date on it, listed the obstacles I had to overcome, identified the people, the groups, the organizations I needed to work with, spelled out a plan of action, set that time limit in there, and identified all of the benefits to me. It was only when I did that that the goal became a reality, and I lost the weight. For 10 or 15 years, I was going to write a book. You know anybody who's going to do just a whole lot of things, folks? I was going to write a book. But it wasn't until I got busy writing the book and writing the plans first before the book ever materialized. Now, if it sounds like I'm trying to sell you on having goals, how many of you are getting close already? How many of you are becoming convinced right quick like that you need to have those goals? There's no question about it. The immortal J.C. Penney many, many years ago said, "Give me a stock clerk with a goal, and I'll give you a man who will make history. But give me a man without a goal, and I'll give you a stock clerk." Now, the interesting thing is goals do not care who has them. Let me give you a classic example of the way they work. In 1950, a war-torn, devastated Japan, a nation which had lost an incredibly high percentage of its young men. Their cities were in ruins. They had been bombed out. But in 1950, they got together. They, meaning industry and government, got together and set a goal. The goal was we're going to be the #1 nation in the world during the 1950s in the production of textiles. In 1959, ladies and gentlemen, they accomplished that objective. In 1960, they set another goal. We're going to be the #1 nation in the world in the production of steel. Now, when you understand there's no iron ore in Japan of any significance, there's no coal of any significance there, we're going to be the #1 nation in the world in the production of steel, it seemed like an absurd goal, and yet they reached their objectives. They had taken all of the steps. In 1970, the Japanese set another goal. They said during the 70s, we'll be the #1 nation in the world in the production of automobiles. They missed it, folks. 1 year. It took them until 1980. In 1980, they set another goal, and this time their goal was, we're going to be the #1 nation in the world in the production of computers and electronics. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, you absolutely must have those goals. You got to write them down. You got to put a date on it. You got to identify those obstacles. You've got to identify the people, the groups you need to work with. You got to find out what it is you need to know. You got to develop a plan of action, and you got to write it down. What's in it for me? Now, that's a formula that I have just given you, pure and simple. Now, if I were to ask you what 3 times 3 was, there isn't a person here who could not instantly answer it. But if I were to ask you what is 5,128 times 2,165, odds are enormous that very few of you could pop out the answer that quickly. But if I were to say to you, get your pencil and paper out, figure it out, then all of you could figure it out. Why? You know the formula. Now, you see, if you know the formula, it really doesn't make any difference, ladies and gentlemen, what the goal really is. When I started to write the book, I took precisely the same steps that I'm talking about. I wrote down the objective. I wrote down the time I completed or expected to complete the book. I identified the obstacles there. And yes, I know this is repetitious. It's the mother of learning. I wrote out and identified the people, the groups, the organizations I needed to work with. I devised a plan of action to do it. I spelled out what I needed to know, and I wrote it all down, what's in it for me. You see, the basic problem is most people, when they're working on their job, they get to thinking, you know, I really ought to be spending time at home with my family. And then when they're at home with the family, get to thinking, you really ought to be out there working for my family. And so when they're out there working for the family, their mind is back home. And when they're back home, their mind is back out there in the field. And then they tell everybody, well, I don't ever have time to do anything. No wonder you're always traveling. You see, the basic problem is not lack of time, it is lack of direction. We all have exactly the same amount of time, whether we're a millionaire or a pauper. All of us have 24 hours every single day. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, we must have goals if we're going to do anything. Goals do a lot of things. For example, they enable you to chase the blues away. I've never known anybody who was truly depressed who had specific and long-range goals. And what goals do is they create activity. And you see, activity, as you work towards reaching them, creates the very excitement which you need in order to accomplish or reach your objectives. The psychologists put it this way: logic will not change an emotion, but action will. And as you get busy working towards these dreams of yours, and yes, you absolutely must have your dreams, ladies and gentlemen, and what we're going to do is look at the ways you build a foundation underneath those dreams. Several years ago, they did an experiment with a number of college students. And in this particular experiment, they let them go to sleep, and they hooked these brain machines up to them. With these brain machines, they could determine precisely within a matter of seconds when the student went to sleep. Then they could tell when that student started to dream. And as the student would start to dream, they would awaken him or her. And then they'd let them go back to sleep, and that is no problem, but when they started to dream, they would awaken them again. And with those brainwave machines, they can tell exactly when they start to dream. At the end of one night of this kind of treatment, many of the students were nervous and fidgety. At the end of 2 nights of this kind of treatment, where they had a reasonable amount of sleep but no dreaming, they became very irritable and very short and very cross. At the end of just 3 nights of a reasonable amount of sleep but no dreaming, they could tell that some of them were headed for some psychological difficulties. And so what they did was they aborted the experiment. Now, about 24 hours later, most of the students were back to normal. Within a week, all of them had returned 100%. But the experiment proved something very conclusively, and that's this: when you're asleep, ladies and gentlemen, you need your dreams. I'm here to tell you that when you're wide awake, you also need your dreams. You must have your goals. You'll never make it as a wandering generality. You must become a meaningful specific. If you're going to work tomorrow because that's what you did yesterday, you're not going to be as good tomorrow as you were yesterday, because now you're 2 days older and no closer to the goal which you do not have. You can't make it as a wandering generality. Most people understand you got to become a meaningful specific. It reminds me of an experiment done some little while ago by Jean-Henri Fabre, the great French naturalist. He took a number of processionary caterpillars, so named because they follow each other in a procession, and he lined them around a flower pot until they formed a never-ending circle. And they started going round and round 24 hours that first day, and then they went the next day and the next, and by about the third or the fourth day, he put some pine needles into the center of that flower pot. That's the food of the processionary caterpillar. They kept going round and round, 7 full days and 7 full nights. They went round and round until they literally dropped dead from starvation and exhaustion. With an abundance of food less than 6 inches away, they had starved to death because they confused activity with accomplishment. You've got some friends that are in the same shape. They're busy, busy, busy all the time. They're going, 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 and they're here and they're there and they're somewhere else. But they never really accomplish anything because they don't have those specific, clearly identifiable objectives. You gotta have those goals.
First real breakthrough that you had as a teen that started you on your path, and how did you get there?
Gosh, there's so many. One of the first ones I think was probably just anchoring in when my mom and my dad, I had 4 different fathers. My mom was a powerful woman, so she kicked my 4th father out, whose name I carry, and he adopted me. And when he went out, she decided it wasn't his side, so she kicked me out too by chasing me out with a knife. And I wasn't worried she was going to stab me or anything, but I decided this is freedom, and I've got to find a way to make my life work. But I had no money. I had a 1960 Volkswagen I worked $40 a week as a janitor to buy and pay for. And so I had no car, I had no money, I had no anything. I went and slept in a person's laundry room, and then I decided I've got to figure out what to do, and I needed to feed my mind because I was so depressed, I was so overwhelmed. I'm missing my brother and sister and feeling just completely out of sorts. So I got on a bus and I traveled 14 miles, I remember, because I ended up running it one time. And I went to this bookstore and I bought this book called The Magic of Believing by Claudia Bristol. It's the first real book other than maybe Think and Grow Rich or Emerson's essays. And I started on this journey of saying every single day I'm going to feed my mind. I'm not going to hope good thoughts show up. I'm going to read biographies. I'm going to find out what makes people tick. I'm going to understand what makes me tick. And I wanted to read a book a day, but I didn't do that. I took a speed reading class and I read 700 books over 7 years. And they were all personal development, human development, psychology, physiology. And then what I try to do is take anything that I learned and apply it. And then when I applied it, I was 5'1" in my sophomore year in high school. I'm 6'7" now. I tell people the difference is personal growth. Really. But sincerely, I became Mr. Solution because I wanted to help everybody. So I was this little fat guy, and I couldn't lose weight, and I lost weight. And all my buddies are like, "How'd you do that?" And I said, "Well, here's what I did." And they lost weight, and then we all got girls. And that led to, as a young kid, that led to where, if you had a problem, I was Mr. Solution. Especially if you're a girl, I was more motivated to help you. So the breakthrough was really understanding the power of compressing decades into days. That if someone has spent decades of their life and they compress it into a book, and you can read it in an hour or a few days, you have such an advantage, because when you learn by your own experience, it's painful and it's slow. When you learn by other people's experience, everybody knows in the financial world, other people's money is leverage, right? Well, other people's experience is more powerful than other people's money, because you can have the money and lose it. But if you get the experience, you can change it all. So I think that was the beginning for me, and it set me on a lifelong path of hunger. I've never lost my hunger.
This story really covers all of the concepts, all of the ideas in which we believe. That's the reason we're going to give you the story in the detail which we are. When I met Bernie, we had a little discussion about what he was doing in Kansas City, and he said, "I came down to hear the session." And I said, "Yeah, but it costs a lot of money to come this far." He laughed. He said, "Well, Zig, thanks to my son David, I don't have to worry about money." I said, "Bernie, that sounds like a story. Why don't you tell me?" He said, "I'll be glad to." This is the story. He says, Zig, when our son David was born, our joy literally knew no bounds. We already had our 2 daughters, now we had our son, and that was what we had hoped that we would have when we got married. But he said it wasn't long before we noticed that something was wrong with David. His little head hung too limply to the right side of his body for it to be a normal situation, and he drooled too much. And so we went to the doctor, and the family doctor said, "No problem, he'll outgrow it." But he said, Zig, we knew that it wasn't quite that simple. So we took him to a specialist. And the specialist, after a very thorough examination, told us that he had the reverse of club's feet. And he said we treated him for that for several weeks. And then it dawned on us that this wasn't it. It was more serious than that. So we found who the top specialist was in all of Canada, and we went to him. And this specialist, after a very thorough examination, said to us that David is a spastic. He has cerebral palsy. He's never going to be able to walk or talk or count to 10. And I suggest that you put him in an institution for his own good and for the good of the, quote, normal members of the family. But Bernie Lofty looked at me and he said, you know, Zig, I'm not a buyer, I'm a seller. I could not buy the idea that my son was going to grow up and be a vegetable. All that doctor had really convinced me to do was to go find a doctor who was not problem conscious and look for one who was solution conscious. So we went to other doctors. He said, as a matter of fact, we went to 30 different doctors, and all 30 of them, in essence, said the same thing, and that is that there is no hope for this little boy. And then they heard of a Dr. Pearlstein down in Chicago, reputedly the foremost authority in the world. But he was so good that he was booked for 2 solid years in advance. Now, that didn't particularly bother Bernie, because hope for the first time had reared its elusive head. And Bernie just figured that somehow or another he was going to get his son in front of Dr. Pearlstein. Well, he found out that Dr. Pearlstein was a bridge player, found out his home number, found out that he played every Friday night with his son. He called him there, and they made a deal. At the first cancellation that they had, Dr. Pearlstein was going to call Bernie, and they would put David, take him on an airplane immediately to Chicago. Well, just 11 days later, they got the call. They loaded David on the airplane, they took him down there, and Dr. Pearlstein gave him easily the most thorough examination I believe that any child has ever had. When the examination was all over, he said to Bernie, this boy is a spastic. He has cerebral palsy. He will never be able to walk or to talk or count to 10 if you listen to the prophets of doom. But he said, I want you to know that I am not problem conscious. I want you to know that I am solution conscious, and I fervently believe there is something which can be done for David if you are willing to do your part. Well, rather obviously the Loftic said, Doctor, what is it you want us to do? Spell it out. Dr. Pearlstein and his nurses spelled it out in minute detail. He said, first of all, you're going to have to work this little boy beyond all human endurance. Then you're going to have to work him some more. You're going to have to push him until he literally falls. And then you are going to have to push him some more. You've got to understand now that once you start this process, that there is no backing up or slowing down or staying away from it. This is a lifetime process, because if you ever discontinue this, then he will revert back to where he was before. One last thing. Don't let him see any other victims of cerebral palsy taking therapy. Because if he watches them take therapy, he will pick up the awkward, inadvertent movements they make, and subconsciously he will make them a part of his own movements. Bernie and Elaine left Chicago enormously excited because Dr. Pearlstein had given them extra hope. He had added believability to it. He had presented them with a plan. To tell you the truth, that's what we've attempted to do all the way through Born to Win. Every time we make you a promise, we give you a plan of action. You see, folks, motivation without instruction and education is ultimately frustrating. For me to tell you you can do something and not to tell you how is a cruel hoax that we have studiously avoided throughout. Every time we've said you can do it, we've always said, here's the way to do it. Well, they went back to Winnipeg, and they went to work with David. They built a little gymnasium down in the basement of their home. They hired a physical therapist and a bodybuilder, and they went to work. It took them a lot of months, but finally one day, David Lofchick could move the length of his own body. It took him several years, but then one day Bernie got a call from the therapist. He said, come on home, I believe David is ready. And he rushed home, and David was down in the gymnasium on a mat, and as he was attempting to do a push-up, and as that little body started to rise into the air, the physical and emotional exertion was so great, there wasn't a dry inch of skin on that little body, and the mat appeared as if somebody had sprinkled it with water. When that one perfect push-up was completed, David and Bernie and Elaine and the therapist and the bodybuilder and the 2 sisters and the neighbors all broke down and shed those tears, which clearly say that happiness is not pleasure. Happiness is victory. No, you don't pay the price. You enjoy the benefits that Diane was so beautifully singing about. Now, the story is even more remarkable when you understand that one of America's leading universities had also examined David, and they said there are no motor connections to the right-hand side of his body. He has no sense of balance. He will never be able to swim or to skate or to ride a bicycle. He just simply will be different. It'll probably take him 2 years even to learn how to float. On October the 23rd, 1971, my wife and I flew to Winnipeg, Canada to attend the bar mitzvah of, quote, little David Lofczyk. Oh, I wish the television cameras had been turned on then. I wish the movie cameras of the world had been there to have witnessed what we saw, especially since I'd been working with Bernie a couple of times each year between that first day back in 1965. And I'd watched David as he grew and as he made all of that progress. But this particular day, as this boy walked tall and straight and strong to the front of the synagogue, as he uttered those words that moved him into the manhood of the faith of his forefathers, knowing what I knew at that particular time, that he had already done as many as 1,100 push-ups in a single day, that he had run 6 miles nonstop, that he was shooting golf in the high 80s, that he was one of the best table tennis players in all of Winnipeg, Canada, that he was skating on the neighborhood hockey team, that he was running the wheels off his 4th bicycle. Oh, I tell the story about David in a lot of the details because, you see, I happen to believe that this story literally covers all of the areas that we cover in Born to Win. You see, to begin with, they dealt with David on a very honest basis. They never said it's going to be easy. The parents were never told it's going to be easy. They were told that you've got to stay with it, but if you'll suck it up and tough it out and stay with it, the results are going to be dramatic. They dealt with the thing character because, you see, character is the ability to carry out a good resolution long after the excitement of the moment has passed. And there were many times when the excitement was no longer there, but David stayed with it, as did his parents. Integrity, integrity, of course, means basic wholeness, and they dealt with the entire person of David Lofczyk, physical, mental, and spiritual, the whole bit. As far as loyalty is concerned, nobody. I mean, those 2 big sisters and the mother and the dad and the doctors and the therapists, they all were loyal to an incredible degree as they worked with David, helping him to accomplish his objectives. And rather, obviously, trust is deeply involved there because it takes a lot of trust for a youngster year after year after year to be willing to do these things when his buddies are all out playing and having a marvelous time. Now, you talk about love. When I think of the story of David Lofczyk, I think it's one of the most beautiful love stories I have ever heard. You see, when he was about 2 years old, every night they had to put heavy leg braces on his legs. Now, David is a beautiful boy. Olive complexion, beautiful green eyes, coal black hair. And every night as he would lay there getting ready to go to bed, he would ask his mom and ask his dad, Mom, do we have to put the braces on tonight? Or Dad, do we have to put them on so tight? And you parents obviously will relate to this. Here a child is whom you love deeply. And with tears in his eyes, he's asking, do you have to do it? But Bernie and Elaine Lofczyk loved David so much that they said no to the tears of the moment so they could say yes to the laughter of a lifetime. When you love someone, you do what is best for that person.
I want to know more about my clients than they know about themselves. I know a man that from Australia decided, he was a dentist, and he decided he was tired of people not showing up. He was tired of trying to bill and not getting paid, properly from various insurance. He was tired of all these things, and one day he just decided to sit down with every one of his patients one-on-one, and he said, I'm changing my practice. I'm going to do a practice where I'm going to take a lot less clients and let go of probably half the clients I have right now. I only want to do business with people who I personally like, who when they come in, I want to sit down, have a cup of tea with them, we'll understand what's going on in their life, what their goals are, and I want to make sure that everything in my psyche is taking care of them and helping them augment the way they look, the way they feel, and their vitality and the health of their system. And he sat down and said, so to do that, I want you to know I have some simple things. I'm promising I'll give you the best dental care of your entire life. I'm promising that if you come in your appointment, you will not be delayed more than maximum of 5 minutes ever. And he laid out all these things. I'll give the best care, this, the most attention. He goes, but this is what I'm going to require for patients that work with me. I'll refer them out to someone else if this is uncomfortable. He said, I require that if they cancel, they're going to have to pay for it. I require they show up on time because I'm going to respect them, they respect me. I'm going to also require that in the next 6 months, that if I do the quality work I promised, they'll give me 2 referrals from 2 other quality people that I'd probably want to take care of as well. And he said, I'm shutting down any other form of my business, and I'm going to spend more quality time with you, and I want the referrals because I don't want to spend time marketing and selling. I want to spend time putting my attention and making your life better. Mm-hmm. He quadrupled his income and cut the time he spent doing dental work by more than 60%.
I believe that.
Just because he became an owner who owned his business instead of running around trying to please everybody and being frustrated that people are canceling and so forth.
Right.
And most of us just don't own ourselves enough, right?
I'm not going to spend much time on work, and don't look shocked. It's not that I don't think it's tremendously important, because it is. We've got to accept responsibility. We've got to accept the fact that we've got to perform. And as I tell the kids all over America today, now's the best time you'll ever have in life to get ahead. Now's the most opportune time in America that it has ever been to get ahead. Here's what I say. If you show up for work on time, and stay there until the appointed departure time. If you do what they pay you to do, and then they pay you, then nobody owes anybody anything. Now, if you want a raise, get there a few minutes early. Ask for extra things to do. Be cheerful and positive and optimistic and helpful. Don't goof off and try to get out of work. Deliberately seek the boss to find extra work, and then I will absolutely guarantee you a raise in short order. Now, your current employer might not be the one to give you the raise. But somebody down the street's going to see what you're doing, and they're going to say, that's the boy I want working for me. That's the girl I want working for me, because he or she are doing more than they're paid to do. That's the way you get a raise. Oh, don't misunderstand, you got to work. You can't be like this old boy down home. And you're going to find out earlier, there are an awful lot of old boys down home. Somebody, at least there were when I was down there, somebody asked him how long he'd been working for his company, and he said, ever since they threatened to fire me. So that's about the size of it, yeah? But here's what we've discovered. If you got a good self-image, if you have your goals set in life, if you've got the right mental attitude, nobody has to tell you, go to work. That just follows naturally. So this is what we're going to work on, and you got to have a desire to succeed. You can't just casually want the good things in life. It's got to become a passion for you. Your dream has got to be more than just an idle thought. You got to be willing to build a foundation under it, and that's for sure. Now, we're going to be taking these steps, and quite obviously, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that these steps are what is necessary. But let me identify to you what one of the major problems in America is. One of the problems is, you see, we have said to people, all of these things are available. We've shown them the big homes, the big cars, the swimming pools, the jet set, the style of living that a lot of people say, yeah, I'd kind of like that. And then on the other side of the ledger, we have said everybody not only can get these things, but everybody deserves these things. America is a rich and affluent land, and everybody can get them. Then we have another segment of society that says that crime is caused by poverty, with one segment saying you deserve these things and you ought to have them, and another segment saying that crime is caused by poverty. We subliminally, subconsciously plant a thought. Don't wait to get it. Go get it right now. There has never been a definitive study that establishes any correlation between crime and poverty. During the Great Depression, the crime rate was much lower in 1939 than it was in 1930, at the end of a decade of the roughest depression our country has ever had. So what we're saying is, let's start climbing some steps. You see, we could draw you an elevator to the top, but I'd have to be honest and say the elevator doesn't work. You're going to have to start taking these steps, and you're going to have to take them one at a time. But I've discovered that people don't mind taking the steps. If you tell them where they are, show them how many there are, and then tell them exactly how to climb the steps. But you see, you gotta climb the steps. You can't skip them. On September the 15th, 1944, in Jackson, Mississippi at the YWCA at exactly 18 minutes after 8 o'clock, I saw the prettiest little girl standing over by the Nickelodeon. Now, some of you won't know what a Nickelodeon is. That's a jukebox, okay? And I thought to myself, boy, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to go over there and I'd like to grab her in my arms and I'd like to start hugging her and kissing her right now. That's exactly what I wanted to do. But if I had, she wouldn't be sitting here as my wife of over 30 years today, because I would have skipped too many steps. So I did something real original. I walked up to her and I said, "Hi." And she said, "Hi." And the first thing you know, since it was a dance, there we were, a little YWCA dance, and we were dancing. And I got her telephone number that night, and we had a lot of telephone calls. And then one day I said, "Hey, we ought to be going out." And she said, "Okay." So we had a date. Then we had another one and another one. And then, you know, it wasn't but 2 years and 2 months and 11 days and 1 hour later that she became my very own. But we took some steps along the way. I don't care how bright you are in school, you cannot move from 2 times 2 equals 4 into analytical geometry. You got to take some steps. Now, the mistake a lot of people make is they get on one step and sit there. You know, that's not what I'm talking about either. What I'm talking about is taking these steps, and then you will get this.
It was the night before we were putting drywall in our house. We were redoing a house, and he had put in all the plastic piping, you know, and I was going to test the joints. They're supposed to be glued together with this pipe glue, right? And I told him I had to test the joints, and he said, "Well, you don't have to test my joints, they never leak." And I thought, yeah, that's okay. How about if I test them? So I went up on the 3rd floor and filled the pipes with water, capping them in the basement like you're supposed to. And like half an hour later, I had 2 inches of water in the basement. There were 30 leaking joints. And that was the night before the drywallers were supposed to show up. So he wasn't particularly competent. That's the point of that story. But even more so, he had put a bunch of the plastic pipe outside where the drywall would be, so it would have been sticking through the wall. So I spent a frenetic night, you know, sawing through plastic pipe and re-gluing joints so that the drywallers could come in. What's the point? If you're going to be a plumber, man, be a good plumber, because otherwise all you do is go out there and cause trouble. We don't need people to cause more trouble. We need people to solve problems. You know, and so you can be a tradesman, and you can make a lot of money as a tradesperson. It's a bloody, reliable, honorable, forthright, productive way of making a living. And there is a hell of a lot of difference between a working man who knows what he's doing and one who doesn't, both in terms of skill and ethics, right? And you work with someone who knows what they're doing, it's a bloody pleasure. They tell you what they're going to do, they tell you how much it will cost, they go and do it, it works, and you pay them. Perfect. Everyone's happy. And that's what happens when you have genuine hierarchies of competence. And so you listen to these panderers of egalitarianism and equity, and they fail to recognize completely that there are differences in rank between people. It's not such a terrible thing, man. Maybe you wouldn't be a great lawyer. Like, it's certainly possible. Most people aren't. But that doesn't mean there isn't something you could be great at. There's lots of hierarchies to attempt to climb, and if you fail in one, go try in another. But the point is, you're still trying to aim for the top, and what the hell are you going to do if you don't try to aim for the top? You know, flap about uselessly and whine about your life? It's not helpful. It'll just make you miserable. You're not reliable to anyone. You can't help out in a crisis. It's like, so you tell young people, and this is another message for conservatives, like, I don't care what you're going to do, but go out there and make something of yourself for God's sake. Be an honest person and work and get to the top of whatever it is that you want to get to the top of. You know, and stand up for yourself like a respectable human being, and be a bit of a light on the world instead of a blight. You know, and you can tell young people that, and they haven't been told that by anyone now. And so the young men are so hungry for that it's painful to watch. They're so relieved when someone finally comes up and says, "Hey, you know, you get your act together a bit, discipline yourself, see if you can learn to tell the truth, concentrate on something for a year or two, you could be a bloody world beater." They think, "Really? That's possible? Wow, that would be interesting. That might make life worth living. It's like, yeah, it might. So why don't you go do it? That's what the damn universities were supposed to be teaching people, and they've forgotten that. I went to Harvard a month ago, month and a half. I used to teach there, and I talked to a bunch of students, and I told them, it's not easy to get into Harvard, Like, you're a valedictorian if you're at Harvard. And not only are you a valedictorian, you're way better than most people at least 2 other things, or you don't get in. And so, like, I don't know what the acceptance rate is, like 5%, and believe me, not everybody applies, so it's a very selective school. And so why am I saying that? It's like, these are high quality kids. So I told them what I just told you. It's like, here you are at Harvard. It's like, get yourself educated, man. Read some books, learn to talk, learn to think. Make yourself into something. Get the hell out there and make the world that put you here happy that you were put there in that great institution. And they came up to me afterwards and said, God, I wish someone would have told us that when we were in our first year. It's like, Jesus, why didn't someone tell them that? For God's sake, it's supposed to be the greatest university in the world. Is it so difficult to figure that out?
One of my most interesting discoveries, and I've now written a book on it, it won't be out for quite a little while yet, but how to develop a creative imagination. The more you know about anything, the more creative you become when you add additional information to that. When I wrote Secrets of Closing the Sale, which is the first book and only book as a manual on how the processes that you follow in sales, only a book in New York Times, first time in that category that ever reached the bestseller stage. Now, what happened was very important. When I read that book, when I had 98% of it written, somebody sent me a little short 3-paragraph summation. And what this little 3 paragraphs said was, this is the heart of the sale. It was 3 short paragraphs. I read those 3 paragraphs, and I added 50 pages to the book. I'd been selling since I was 8, been sales training since I was 21. I knew a lot about sales. The new information revolutionized a whole lot of things. Keep on growing. It helps a whole lot of people. When you talk about relationships, Harvard Business Class in 1949, almost a little over 49% of all of the graduates, a study was done on them, and this class of 1949, 49% of them were at least vice presidents in major corporations. When asked how they accounted for that, and CNN did a telecast on these men, they said, well, number one, our wives were supportive. Their careers were built on integrity. They were risk takers, but they did not, they were not gamblers. What do we do at our company? How many of the things do we teach, and what do I teach that are so important to me as I'm talking about it now? Our mission statement includes a big frying pan to be the difference maker in the personal, family, professional, and spiritual lives of enough people to make a positive difference in the world. That's a pretty audacious mission statement, ladies and gentlemen, but it's got to be built on character. Are we being successful in that? Well, over 40 languages of what I've been teaching have been printed and used. We've got several information bits that really have made a difference in the lives of other people. In short, with 40 translations of our work in different languages, we're reaching an awful lot of people. Now, we teach things that are generally not taught in school, as I already have said, but I want to talk about another little factor. 90% of the visits to medical doctors are directly or indirectly related to stress. 90%. If we can reduce stress, and incidentally, the same process that reduces stress is exactly the same process that will enable you to have a long-term balanced career. My stress level, and I face as many deadlines as anybody you know. It's always a book production, a class I'm teaching, a seminar I'm presenting, and each one of them requires time and concentration. Example, how many of you feel like I've made this talk before? Can I see your hand, please? Several hundred times. I made it yesterday. You know what I did between yesterday and today? I spent over 6 hours getting ready for today. You see, I think it would be arrogant if I thought I could stand up and spit it out just because I did it yesterday or hundreds of times. That's arrogance. That's when Buster Douglas knocks out Mike Tyson. That's when an expansion team in Houston beats an established NFL team in Dallas. I dare not. Look at the people here, several thousand. I'm taking over an hour. That's several thousand hours of time. Where would my integrity be if I came here unprepared to make something, a presentation that could make a difference in your life? There is no way. You got to prepare for it, ladies and gentlemen. When stress does hit you, how many of you will admit that after 9/11, maybe you had a little stress? Can I see your hands, please? All right. Let me tell you something, folks. If you take the word stressed and spell it backwards, it's desserts. When you respond to life instead of react to it, react is negative. You get sick, go to the doctor. She gives you a prescription, says, see me tomorrow. You walk in the next day, she said, uh-oh, it's not working. We have to change the prescription. You get a little nervous. But if she smiled and said, hey, it's working. And so she's just responded, and you feel better because now you see some real hope in order to get ahead in life.